The New York skyline loomed grey and indifferent outside the towering windows of Sterling Holdings, casting long shadows across the 47th floor on that cold, overcast Monday morning. Tessa Lane, at 28, sat hunched over her desk in the outer office, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she finalized the quarterly report for her boss. 3 years as Grant Sterling's executive assistant had turned her into a ghost, efficient, invisible, and utterly forgettable. Colleagues nodded at her in the elevator, but no one remembered her name. To Grant, she was even less a reliable cog in his empire of steel and finance summoned only when needed. She glanced at the clock, 8:45 a.m., and hit save her mind already shifting to the anonymous bouquet that had appeared on her desk for the 3rd day in a row. Today's was a cluster of deep red roses, their petals velvety and fresh, accompanied by a simple card, "Thinking of you." It was from an old college friend, nothing more, but it brought a rare warmth to her otherwise monotonous routine. The heavy oak door to Grant's inner sanctum swung open with a sharp creak. He emerged like a storm front, tall, broad-shouldered, his charcoal suit impeccably tailored, his dark hair precisely combed. At 35, Grant Sterling was the epitome of corporate power, sharp jawline piercing, blue eyes that dissected deals worth billions. But today, those eyes burned with something unfamiliar fury. "Tessa," he barked, his voice low and edged like a blade, "in my office. Now." Her heart skipped. In 3 years he'd never spoken to her like that. She stood smoothing her simple black pencil skirt and followed him inside. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing them in the expansive room, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive mahogany desk overlooking the city. The air felt thick, charged. Grant didn't sit. He paced to the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the misty Hudson River below. Then he turned his gaze, locking onto hers with an intensity that made her stomach twist. For the past 3 days, he said, his tone measured but trembling at the edges, "Flowers have been delivered to your desk every morning." Tessa blinked, her mouth going dry. How did he know she hadn't mentioned it to anyone? "Roses today," he continued, stepping closer. "Tulips yesterday and white lilies on Friday. Each one signed anonymously, but I had security check the locks." Her pulse raced. "Mr. Sterling Grant, it's nothing. Just an old friend from college. Harmless." He stopped inches away, his cologne a subtle mix of sandalwood and citrus filling the space between them. "Harmless." His voice dropped. "You've been leaving at exactly 5 o'clock every day this week? No more late nights. You're different, smiling more, happier." Tessa felt exposed, as if he'd peeled back layers she'd kept hidden. "I don't understand. Why does this matter?" Grant's jaw tightened, a flicker of pain crossing his features, something raw and unguarded. He ran a hand through his hair, breaking his perfect composure for the first time she'd ever seen. "Because," he said, his words halting, "I've noticed every change, every detail, and seeing you light up like that, it kills me because I don't know why. It's not because of me." The room spun. Tessa's breath caught. 3 years of clipped orders, professional distance, and now this. "Grant, why do you care?" He met her eyes, no longer the untouchable CEO, but a man stripped bare. "Because I've cared all along. I just never had the courage to show it." Silence enveloped them, thick and electric. Tessa's mind reeled, piecing together fragments she'd ignored the way his gaze lingered a second too long in meetings, the rare fleeting smiles. For the first time, she saw him not as her boss, but as someone who had been watching her far more closely than she'd ever imagined. The morning after Tessa arrived at the office earlier than usual, the chill of the New York streets still clinging to her coat as she stepped off the elevator onto the 47th floor. The vast open space was eerily quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights, the only sound breaking the silence. She hung her coat and approached her desk, her mind replaying the previous day's confrontation in endless loops. Grant's uncharacteristic vulnerability, his confession that he'd been watching her caring in ways she'd never suspected. It felt surreal, like a scene from a dream she couldn't shake. As she set down her bag, her eyes landed on a steaming paper cup on her desk. The familiar logo of Café Noir stared back at her, the little artisanal spot 3 blocks away, known for its perfect cappuccinos, with just the right amount of foam and a hint of cinnamon. She'd mentioned it once months ago in passing during a late-night work session when Grant had asked about her coffee preferences. "It's the only place that gets it right," she'd said offhandedly. And now here it was, still hot, as if placed there moments before. Tessa picked it up, the warmth seeping through the cup into her fingers. No note, no explanation. She glanced toward Grant's office door, which was ajar, a sliver of light spilling out. Taking a steadying breath, she knocked softly and pushed it open. Grant was already at his desk reviewing documents on his tablet, his posture as impeccable as ever. He looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers without a trace of the turmoil from yesterday. "Good morning, Tessa. You're early." She held up the cup. "This from Café Noir. Did you—" He leaned back in his chair, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I happened to pass by on my way in. Thought you might need it after yesterday." Tessa stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "You happened to pass by 3 blocks out of your way, and you remembered exactly how I like it." Grant's smile faded, slightly replaced by a more serious expression. He set down his tablet. "I pay attention to details. It's what makes me good at my job." But it was more than that, and they both knew it. As Tessa sat across from him, the cappuccino forgotten in her hand, fragments of the past 3 years began to resurface, reshaping themselves in her mind like puzzle pieces she'd overlooked. She remembered last winter when her father had been rushed to the hospital with a severe flu complication. She'd kept it to herself, not wanting to burden anyone at work, but Grant had noticed her distraction during a meeting. The next day, an email arrived. "Take the week to work from home. Everything's covered." No questions asked, no deductions from her PTO. At the time, she'd chalked it up to corporate efficiency, keeping the team productive. But now she wondered if he'd pulled strings behind the scenes. Perhaps even called her father's doctor to ensure the best care. Then there was the incident 2 years ago with a particularly arrogant client, Jonathan Hale, a real estate mogul who dismissed her input during a negotiation. "What does the secretary know about multi-million-dollar deals?" he'd sneered. Tessa had bitten her tongue, her cheeks burning, but Grant hadn't. He'd paused the meeting, his voice ice cold as he turned to Hale. "She's my executive assistant, and if you can't respect her expertise, you can leave. Apologize." Hale had stammered an apology in front of the entire boardroom, and the deal proceeded on Sterling Holdings' terms. Tessa had assumed it was about maintaining professionalism, not personal defense. As these memories flooded back, Tessa felt a warmth spread through her chest, mingled with confusion. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" she asked softly. "All those times you helped me, I thought it was just protocol." Grant's gaze softened his fingers, drumming lightly on the desk, a rare sign of nervousness. Because a week later, the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum buzzed with the city's elite crystal chandeliers, casting a golden glow over tuxedos and gowns, as Sterling Holdings hosted its annual charity gala for urban education initiatives. Tessa had been dreading the event, not because of the crowds or the small talk, but because Grant had insisted she attend not as his assistant, but as his +1 for the evening, citing some vague need for her organizational skills. She smoothed the fabric of her sapphire blue evening gown, a loan from the PR department's wardrobe, its silk hugging her figure in ways her usual office attire never did. The colour brought out the warmth in her hazel eyes, and as she caught her reflection in the lobby mirror, she felt a flicker of confidence amid the nerves. Grant arrived precisely on time, his black tuxedo accentuating his broad frame, a single white rose pinned to his lapel. When he saw her waiting near the entrance, he paused mid-stride, his eyes widening slightly before he composed himself. "Tessa," he said, his voice lower than usual, "you look stunning." It wasn't the polished compliment of a CEO. There was a raw edge to it, his gaze lingering on the curve of her neckline before meeting her eyes. She felt heat rise to her cheeks, murmuring a thank you as he offered his arm. Inside the ballroom, the air was thick with perfume and laughter string quartets playing softly in the background. Grant navigated the room with his usual command, shaking hands with donors and executives, but tonight he kept Tessa close. When a waiter passed with champagne flutes, he plucked two and handed her one without asking, his fingers brushing hers. "To a successful night," he toasted quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. As the evening progressed, he introduced her not as "my assistant," but as Tessa Lane, the brilliant mind behind our latest strategies. She spoke with confidence to a group of investors about the gala's impact, feeling Grant's approving gaze on her the whole time. He was attentive in ways that blurred the lines, refilling her water glass before she could reach for it, placing a gentle hand on her lower back to guide her through the crowd, laughing at her quiet observations about the guests. One particularly boisterous philanthropist cornered her with questions about the company's expansion, and Grant stepped in, seamlessly steering the conversation while ensuring she wasn't overwhelmed. It felt protective, almost possessive, and Tessa's heart raced with the realization that this wasn't just professional courtesy. As the auction wound down and guests began to mingle on the terrace, Grant leaned close. "Let's get some air," he suggested, his breath warm against her ear. They slipped out onto the stone balcony overlooking Central Park, the city lights twinkling like distant stars below. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain, and Tessa shivered slightly in her gown. Without a word, Grant shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders, the fabric still warm from his body. "Tessa," he began, turning to face her, his hands in his pockets as if to steady himself. "I can't pretend anymore. Watching you tonight smiling at those investors holding your own, it's been torture." She clutched the jacket tighter, her pulse thundering. "Torture? Why?" He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking. "Because every time you laugh at someone else's joke, every time you light up for a stranger, I feel this jealousy. It's irrational, unprofessional, but it's there. I've spent 3 years building walls, telling myself I couldn't cross that line. You're my assistant, brilliant, irreplaceable. But I've been lying to myself. I've crossed it in my heart 1,000 times. Tessa's breath hitched the wind-whipping strands of hair across her face. She searched his eyes, seeing vulnerability she'd never imagined in the man who commanded boardrooms with ease. Are you joking with me? Playing some game? No, he said, firmly reaching out to tuck the stray hair behind her ear, his touch lingering. I'm not. I've watched you grow into this incredible woman, handling crises I throw at you without flinching. But it's more than admiration. It's you. Your quiet strength, the way you remember every detail, how you make this chaotic world feel ordered. I want to be the one who makes you smile like that, not some old college friend or anyone else. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant hum of the city. Tessa's mind whirled 3 years of stolen glances, unspoken support, now laid bare. The wind gusted again, pressing them closer, and for the first time she didn't pull away. The world didn't take kindly to whispers of change, especially in the cutthroat corridors of high finance. It started subtly, an anonymous letter slipped under the door of the HR director's office, its contents typed in stark black ink. Inappropriate relationship between CEO Grant Sterling and his assistant Tessa Lane. Abuse of power. Investigate immediately. Word spread like wildfire through the executive suite, murmurs turning to outright speculation by lunchtime. Tessa felt the shift the moment she walked into the break room. Colleagues averted their eyes, conversations halting mid-sentence. By afternoon, the storm escalated. Jonathan Klein, one of Sterling Holdings' largest investors, a grizzled tycoon with a portfolio rivaling nations, stormed into Grant's office unannounced. Tessa, stationed outside, heard every raised voice through the cracked door. This entanglement. Klein boomed. It's a liability. The board's buzzing. If you don't clean it up, I'm pulling my stake. 20% of your capital gone overnight. Grant's response was measured, but Tessa caught the edge in his tone. Jonathan, this is personal. It doesn't affect the bottom line. Klein laughed bitterly. Everything affects the bottom line, boy. Fix it or watch your empire crumble. Grant emerged from the meeting looking haggard, his tie loosened for the first time Tessa could recall. He caught her eye and nodded toward his office. Once inside, he closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling deeply. You've heard, he asked, though it wasn't really a question. Tessa nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The letter, the rumors, it's because of us, of what you said on the terrace. He crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling before her chair so their eyes were level. Tessa, I won't let this destroy you. Your career, your reputation, I'll step down if that's what it takes. Announce my resignation tomorrow. Cite personal reasons. The board will move on. Her heart clenched. No, she whispered fiercely, shaking her head. You built this company from nothing. Years of your life, your vision, you can't throw it away for me. Grant's hands found hers, his grip firm. What good is any of it if I lose you? I've spent too long prioritizing deals over people, over you. This isn't just about us. It's about finally choosing what's real. They argued, then voices rising in the confines of the office. Tessa stood pacing the Persian rug. And what about me? If you resign, it'll look like guilt, like I was the cause. I'll be blacklisted in this industry. We both lose. Grant countered, his frustration evident. Better that than watching them drag your name through the mud. I have connections. I can start over. But you You deserve better than being collateral damage. The debate stretched into the evening, the city lights flickering on outside the windows like judgmental eyes. Tessa felt tears sting her eyes, the weight of their impossible choice pressing down. Love or livelihood? The fairy tale shattered against reality's sharp edges. Finally exhausted, she left for home, the argument unresolved. That night, alone in her modest apartment overlooking the East River, she sat at her kitchen table and drafted her resignation letter. Effective immediately. She typed, her fingers trembling. It was the only way to protect him, to sever the tie before it cost him everything. The next morning dawned brighter, the clouds parting to let sunlight stream into the office. Tessa arrived with a sealed envelope in her bag, her resolve steeled. But as she approached Grant's door, she heard voices, multiple authoritative tones echoing from within. Pushing it open, she froze. The entire board was assembled around the conference table, Grant standing at the head, his expression defiant. "Ladies and gentlemen," he was saying, his voice steady and resonant. "Yes, the rumours are true. I have feelings for Tessa Lane, deep, genuine ones. She's not just my assistant. She's the most capable, insightful person I've ever worked with. And if loving her means I'm unfit to lead, then so be it. I'll divest my shares first, sell them on the open market if needed. But I won't deny what's real for the sake of appearances." A hush fell over the room. Tessa's breath caught the envelope forgotten in her hand. One of the older board members, Elias Hawthorne, a veteran investor with a reputation for wisdom, cleared his throat. "Son," he said slowly, "I've seen empires rise and fall on less. But what I see here is a man with spine, integrity. We invested in you because of that. If this woman makes you better, then hell keep her around." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group, culminating in a smattering of applause that grew into a full ovation. Grant turned to Tessa, his eyes locking onto hers across the room. In that moment, she understood he had chosen her not with words, but with everything he had. And for the first time, she felt truly seen, not as an assistant or a shadow, but as the woman worth risking it all for. 6 months later, the boardroom at Sterling Holdings hummed with a different energy. Tessa no longer occupied the outer desk. She had been promoted to Director of Creative Strategy, a role unanimously approved by the board after she spearheaded a groundbreaking rebranding campaign that boosted the company's market share by 15%. Her ideas, once quietly implemented behind the scenes, now drove board discussions, and her office adjacent to Grant's overlooked the same sprawling cityscape that had once felt so distant. Grant watched her thrive with a quiet pride, often catching himself smiling during meetings as she presented with the confidence he'd always seen in her. Their relationship had evolved carefully, away from prying eyes at first, but now it was an open secret within the company, respected, even admired after Grant's bold stand. They stole lunches together in hidden cafes, shared late-night walks along the High Line, and built a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. One mild spring evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Grant led Tessa back to the rooftop terrace of the office building, the same spot where he'd first confessed his feelings. The city sprawled beneath them, alive with the pulse of traffic and distant sirens. But up here it was just the two of them. He had arranged for the space to be cleared, a small table set with candles flickering softly. "Tessa," he said, taking her hands in his voice steady but laced with emotion. "You were once the invisible force keeping everything together. To me, you've always been the light cutting through the chaos, the one who saw the details I missed, who made sense of my world. He dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. The ring inside caught the fading light, a simple solitaire diamond set in platinum, elegant and unassuming, just like her. I don't want to spend another day without you by my side, not as my partner in business, but in life. Tessa Lane, will you marry me? Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, whispering, yes, before he slipped the ring onto her finger. He stood, pulling her into an embrace, their foreheads touching as the city lights began to twinkle on below. A year passed in a whirlwind of planning and shared dreams. On a blooming afternoon in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, under a canopy of cherry blossoms shedding petals like soft confetti, they exchanged vows in an intimate ceremony, surrounded by close friends and family. Tessa wore a flowing ivory gown with delicate lace sleeves, her hair loose in waves, while Grant stood tall in a tailored navy suit, his eyes never straying from her. As they stood before the officiant, Tessa spoke first, her voice clear and steady. Grant, you lived in a world of numbers and negotiations, always one step ahead. I lived in the shadows, content to support without being seen. But when you truly looked at me, saw beyond the assistant to the woman, I felt my world shift, colors blooming where there was only grey. Grant took her hands, his gaze intense and full of promise. Tessa, you've been my anchor, my clarity. I promise to spend every day showing you that you're not just seen, you're cherished. No more shadows, no more distance. From this moment, we walk together hand in hand. They sealed their vows with a kiss as petals swirled around them, applause rising from the small gathering. In that instant, amid the fragrance of spring and the soft rustle of leaves, Tessa knew she'd found not just love, but a partner who had rewritten her story from unseen to unbreakable.